11 years I've been standing on stages, comedy clubs where nobody laughed, radio booths at 4 in the morning, game show floors where the lights are so bright you can't see the first 3 rows. I've hosted weddings, funerals, family reunions that turned into fistfights, and I've handed out more checks than I can count. I thought I'd seen everything television could show a man. I was wrong. And it took a 74-year-old stranger with a piece of metal in his hand to prove it to me. It started like every other taping. You want to know the truth about Family Feud? 90% of my job is energy. I walk out there, I clap my hands, I straighten my tie. I look into those two families lined up on either side of me. And I decide right there in the first 2 seconds that we are all going to have the best day of our lives. That's the trick. You bring the joy with you, or there isn't any. So I walked out that morning the way I always do. Big smile, loud voice. How we feeling today, everybody? The audience roared back at me the way they do. Two families ready to go to war, over 100 survey answers. One family from Ohio, big loud folks, matching red shirts. The other family from down south, cousins and aunties, the whole crew. And then the camera started rolling and I did my thing. I asked my questions, I made my faces. Somebody gave an answer so ridiculous, I had to walk clear off the stage and stare at the floor for 10 seconds just to keep from losing it. Regular day. Beautiful, ordinary, blessed regular day. But here's the thing about doing this job, as long as I have, my eyes are always moving. Even when I'm cracking a joke, even when I've got my back to one family and I'm leaning on that podium, part of me is scanning that studio. Producers call it reading the room. My grandmother would have called it something older than that. She'd say some people are just tuned to notice the one who's hurting. And that's when I saw him. He was sitting in the audience, third row aisle seat. An old man. 70 something, I figured, though something about the way he held himself made him seem both older and younger at the same time. Old in the face, but straight in the spine. Like a man who'd been trained a long time ago never to slouch and had never once forgotten the lesson. Everybody around him was laughing, clapping, doing the wave, hollering out answers, and he wasn't. He wasn't upset. He wasn't bored. He was just still, quiet in a way that had a whole life packed inside it. His hands were folded in his lap, and in those hands, he was holding something, turning it over and over, a small dark object catching the studio lights. I kept the game going. That's the professional part of me, the part that never stops. But my heart had already walked up those steps and sat down next to that man. We came up on a natural break in the taping, the kind where they reset the board and touch up everybody's makeup, and I usually go grab a bottle of water and tell a filthy joke to the crew. Not that day. That day, I stepped down off my stage, walked up the aisle, and I crouched down right next to that old man's seat. Sir, I said, I've been watching you the whole time, and you are the only person in this room not enjoying my show. Now that hurts a man's feelings. He looked at me, and he smiled, but it was the kind of smile that cost something. And he opened up his hands, and he showed me what he'd been holding. It was a medal, military, old. The ribbon faded from whatever bright color it had once been to a soft, tired purple. The metal worn smooth on the edges from years and years of a thumb rubbing across it. I did what I do. I tried to keep it light. Sir, I said, grinning, looks to me like that's your lucky charm. You bring that to bring me luck today. And that old man looked down at the medal in his open palm and he said, quiet. So quiet I had to lean in to catch it. This is the last piece of my life that my son left behind for me. I want you to understand something. In this business, you learn to keep the show moving no matter what. The cameras are rolling. The clock is ticking. There are 100 people whose whole day depends on me keeping the trains running on time. I looked at the floor manager, and I said the 3 words I almost never say. Hold the taping. We took a real break then, a long one. And I sat down next to that man, and I did the only thing that mattered anymore. which was listen, his name. I'll keep some of it private because he asked me to. And a man like this you don't argue with. But he told me he was a soldier. Vietnam. He went over there when he was barely 19 years old, a boy who'd never been farther from home than the county fair, and he came back a different creature entirely. He told me about things I won't repeat here, things he'd seen, things that 50 years later still wouldn't let him sleep a full night through. He said, Steve, there are nights I still smell it. The jungle, the smoke. You don't ever put a war all the way down. You just learned to carry it quieter. And I'll be honest with you, I've met a lot of folks in this business who like to talk about hard times. But there's a difference between somebody telling you a story and somebody letting you look, just for a second, through a window into a room they usually keep locked. That's what this was. He wasn't performing his pain for me. He carried it too long and too privately for that. He was just, for whatever reason, on that day, in that seat, letting one other human being see it. And I understood that was a kind of trust you don't get handed twice in a lifetime. So I shut my mouth and I listened harder than I've ever listened to anybody. When he finally made it home, he had a 2-year-old son waiting for him, a little boy who didn't know the stranger walking through the door. And he told me, and this is the part that got me, he said he made a decision that very first day. Holding that little boy who didn't recognize him, he decided, I am not going to raise my son to just be a good man. I'm going to raise him to be a protector, a guardian of this country the way I tried to be. And he did. He raised that boy on stories of duty and courage and sacrifice. And it took, Lord did it, take. That little 2-year-old grew up tall and strong and good. And the day he turned old enough, he walked into a recruiting office and joined the United States Army. A few months of training, and then the orders came down. Afghanistan, the border, the worst of it. The old man's voice never wavered while he told me all this. That's what broke my heart the most, honestly. He'd told it so many times inside his own head that he'd sanded all the shake out of it. And then he got to the day. He said he was in his kitchen, ordinary morning, and a car he didn't recognize pulled up outside his house, and 2 soldiers in dress uniform got out. And he said, Steve, every military parent knows what that car means. You know before they knock. You know before they say a single word. 2 of them, in dress blues, walking slow up your driveway. That car only comes to say one thing. His son had been killed during an operation. Overseas, gone. And they handed him a medal, his boy's Purple Heart, for wounds received in service to this country. And he told me, and here I had to grip the arm of that chair because the professional part of me was long gone by now. It was just a man listening to another man. He told me that when they put that medal in his hands, the grief nearly killed him where he stood. But underneath the grief, way down under it, there was something else. There was pride, a terrible, aching, unbearable pride. His son had died the way he'd raised him to live, protecting people, guarding something bigger than himself. He'd been carrying that medal every single day for years, rubbing his thumb across it. That's why the edges were worn smooth. I had to take a second. Fiftimal BQL. I had to look away and get myself right because I was about to lose it in front of 200 people. And then he said the thing that finished me off. He said, you want to know why I'm here, Steve? Why an old man like me came all the way to sit in this audience? He turned that medal over in his fingers. My boy was your biggest fan. Family Feud. Every night, he'd sit on that couch and holler at the television. And he used to tell me, all the time, he'd say, Dad, one day when I'm home for good, we're gonna go on Family Feud together. And I'm gonna shake Steve Harvey's hand. He looked up at me. When he came home from his tour, that's the first thing we were gonna do. Come find you. He never got to. So I figured I'd come do it for him. Come sit in his seat. Come see the show he loves so much. Just once for him. I have hosted a lot of shows, ladies and gentlemen, and in that moment, I would have traded every one of them, every award, every dollar, just to give that man 5 minutes with his son back. But I couldn't. Nobody could. So I just took his hand, the one not holding the medal, and I held it. And two grown men sat in a television studio and didn't say a word because there weren't any words left that were worth anything. Finally, I said, "Sir, would you do me the honor of letting me hold it? Your boy's medal. Just for a second. I'd be honored to hold something a hero carried." And he placed it in my hands. Now here's where I have to slow down because what happened next, I still don't fully understand. I've stopped trying to understand it. Some things you just accept as more than coincidence and leave it at that. I took that medal in my two hands, careful, like it was made of glass, and I looked down at it. And I don't know, my thumb caught on something. An edge. The back of the medal, where the metal met the ribbon, there was a seam that didn't sit right. And as I turned it, the metal came apart in my hands. Not broken, but the backing separated. The way a locket opens. It hit the studio floor with a little metal sound, and out of it, out of the back of that metal, fluttered a small square of paper, folded up tight, yellowed, old. The old man's face went white. He reached down, and I got there first and picked it up off the floor, both of them, the metal and this little folded paper. And I held the paper up. "Sir," I said, "did you know this was in here?" He shook his head. His hands were trembling now for the first time in the whole conversation. "I never," he said, "Steve, I've carried that medal every day for years, and I never knew there was anything inside it. I don't, how would I now understand? I don't open a stranger's private things. That's not who I am." So I asked him, I said, "Sir, this is yours. This belongs to you and your family. Do I have your permission to open it? You want me to hand it right back? I'll hand it right back this second." And that old soldier looked at that little folded piece of paper for a long, long time. And then he nodded. "Open it," he whispered. "I don't think my hands can." So I did. Careful. It was folded in fourths, soft with age, and I opened it up, and there was handwriting on it. Young man's handwriting. And I read the first line. And ladies and gentlemen, in 34 years of live television, my face has never done what it did in that moment. I felt the blood leave it. I felt my knees go loose, because the note started like this, Mr. Started, Steve Harvey. My name, this paper folded inside a dead soldier's medal, hidden for years, and it was addressed to me. I looked at the old man. He didn't understand yet. He couldn't see the words. And I did the only thing I could do. I read it out loud, my voice shaking on every word. "Mr. Steve Harvey, if this medal ever finds its way into your hands, then please, you have to tell my dad the truth. I didn't die that day." The whole studio went silent. 200 people, and you could have heard a pin drop on carpet. Somewhere, a camera operator gasped. I saw a producer in the back put both hands over her mouth. The old man was staring at me. "What?" he said. "What did you—" "Read it again, Steve. Read it again." And my hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the paper. But I read it again. I didn't die that day. "That's not—" The old man's voice broke apart. "That's my son's handwriting. That's Steve. That's his hand. I'd know it anywhere. But they told me, they gave me the medal. They told me he was how?" Now, I want to be honest with you about something because you're going to hear all kinds of versions of this story. People think a TV show like ours, everything's planned down to the second. And most days, that's true. But I swear to you on everything I love, I did not know. I did not plan a single second of what was happening. My producers do surprises. I know that. Sometimes they cook something up and don't tell me so. My reaction is real. And a little voice in the back of my head was starting to whisper that maybe, somebody backstage knew something I didn't. But in that moment, I was just as lost as that old man. I was standing there holding a note from a soldier the whole world believed was dead. A note that said he wasn't, and I did not know what came next. So I turned to my producers and I saw it on their faces. That look. And I knew they knew something. And I made a decision. I turned to the audience and to the cameras and I said, folks, we are stopping the show right now. I don't know exactly what's about to happen, but I know it's bigger than any game. I turned to my floor manager and I gave the signal, cut the game, hold everything. And that's when the door at the side of the stage, the big one, the one we bring the fancy prizes through, that's when it started to open. I heard it before I saw anything clearly. A sound, a soft, uneven sound on the stage floor. Step, pause, step. Not the sound of a man walking normal. The sound of a man walking careful, learning to walk all over again. And then he came into the light. A man in a military uniform. Young, younger than his father by half a century, but with the same straight spine, the same set to the jaw. He came through that door slow, and I looked down and I saw why he was slow. One of his legs was gone. From above the knee, he was walking on a prosthetic, a metal and carbon leg, and you could tell he hadn't been walking on it very long because every step was a decision, a small act of courage all its own. Step, pause, step. He came out onto that stage and he stopped. And he looked across all that distance at the old man in the third row, and the whole studio was holding its breath. Bow, bow. And the old man, his son's medal in one hand, that impossible note in mine, he rose up out of his seat, slow, like a man in a dream who's afraid to wake up. His mouth was moving, but no sound was coming out, and the young soldier looked at his father across that studio, and his own eyes were streaming, and he said one word. He said, Dad. I have to stop for a second, every time, right here, because I don't have the words for the sound that came out of that old man. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a cry. It was something from before language, a sound a father makes when the one thing he buried, the one thing he grieved for years, the hole that got torn in the middle of his life, when that thing turns around and walks back into the light and says, Dad. The old man came up out of that row. He didn't walk up the aisle. He fell up it, stumbling, both hands out, and the young soldier came toward him as fast as that new leg would carry him, and they met at the bottom of the stage steps. And that father grabbed his son and held on like he was going to hold him together with his own two arms, like if he ever let go, the world would take him again. And I stood there on my own stage. I've handed out $1 million. I've surprised people with cars and houses and long-lost family, and I have never, not once, seen anything like the two of them holding on to each other. 50 years of a father's love and 4 years of a father's grief, all of it pouring out at once. And neither one of them able to say a single word past that boy's name and that old man just saying over and over, you're alive, you're alive, you're alive, you're alive. The whole studio was gone. 200 people weeping openly. My camera operators, professionals, folks who filmed everything, wiping their eyes and trying to keep the shot. And me, I'll tell you exactly what I did. I took my glasses off and I turned my back to the audience for a second and I let myself cry like I haven't cried since I was a boy. Because some moments are too big to host. You just have to be a person inside them. When we finally got the young man a chair and got his father sitting next to him, hand clamped on his son's arm like he'd never let go again, I came over with the microphone and I said, son, I think we all need to understand, because your father, this whole country, believed you were gone. What happened out there? And he told us. He told us about the operation. He wouldn't give the details. He said he still couldn't, that parts of it were classified even now. But he told us the shape of it. His unit was ambushed. It went bad, fast, in the worst way. And in the middle of it, with everything coming apart, he went back. Not once. Several times. He pulled men out. Men who would have died where they fell. He carried his brothers out of the fire on his own back. And on the last trip, an explosion took his leg and very nearly took the rest of him. He told us he doesn't remember most of the months that came after. He was in a coma a long time. And here's the part that turned my blood cold and made the whole impossible thing make a terrible kind of sense because of the operation he'd been on, because of who he'd been fighting and what he'd seen. The government made a decision. They classified his survival for his safety and for the safety of the mission. The world was told he had died. His name was released as killed in action. His father was handed his Purple Heart. And meanwhile, that boy was fighting the hardest battle of his life in a military hospital wing that officially didn't exist under a status that officially said he was dead. For years, I looked at him and I said, "Son, they told your daddy you were gone. For years, you couldn't. There was no way to." And he shook his head, tears just running down his face. "No, sir," he said, "there wasn't. I wanted to. Every single day. There is no pain like knowing your father is grieving you, and you cannot reach across that space and tell him you're breathing. But I couldn't. Not until they cleared me. Not until it was safe." Then he reached out and he touched that medal still in his father's hand. "Before I deployed," he said, "I had a feeling. Soldiers get feelings." I wrote that note, and I hid it in the back of my own medal, the one I figured they'd give my dad if the worst ever happened. And I addressed it to you, Mr. Harvey, because you were the one thing my dad and I had that was just ours, every night in front of your show. It was the one place the war couldn't follow us. I figured if that note ever reached you, if the medal ever came to your hands, then you would tell him. You'd tell him not to give up. That maybe I was still out there somewhere. I never dreamed it would happen like this. Now, do you see why I stopped the show? Do you see why some things are bigger than a game? I turned to that audience. And I've said a lot of things on a lot of stages, but I meant these more than any of them. I said, folks, we come on this stage to laugh. And that's good. This country needs to laugh. But every now and then, God pulls the curtain back and shows you what's really underneath all of it. And I want you to look. Look at these two men. I put my hand on that old soldier's shoulder. This man went to war when he was a boy, came home carrying things no man should carry. And then he raised a son to serve, and he gave that son to this country, and this country told him his boy was gone. And he believed it. He grieved it for years. And he still got up every morning, and he still carried that medal, and he still came here today to sit in his son's seat at his son's favorite show, just to feel close to a boy he thought he'd never hold again. And I put my other hand on that young man's shoulder. And this man went back into the fire when everything in his body was screaming at him to run. And he carried his brothers out, and he gave a piece of himself, a piece he's never getting back, so that other men could go home to their fathers. And then he lay in a bed for years, alive, and had to let the whole world believe he was dead, including the one man he loved most, because that's what duty asked of him. I looked out at all of them. I looked into that camera, and I said what I will believe until the day I die. Heroes don't only win on the battlefields. Sometimes a hero is a soldier far from home, guarding a country he can't even see. And sometimes a hero is an old man in the third row, carrying his grief in his pocket, refusing to put his child down. The ones who serve and the ones who waited home for them, they are all heroes. Every last one. We didn't finish that game the way we started it. How could we? Instead, that whole studio spent the rest of that taping being something better than an audience. We were witnesses. We were, for one afternoon, one big family that understood exactly what it cost to keep us all free. Before we closed, that father stood up with his son's arm around him now, his living son, and he looked at me and he tried to thank me. And I stopped him. I said, "Sir, don't you thank me. I didn't do anything but stop talking long enough to listen. You raised that hero, and he saved men's lives. All I did was hold the medal." And the son, he insisted on standing. on that new leg, wobbling but proud, and he pulled himself up as straight as that spine would go, and he raised his hand and he gave me a salute, a real one. And I am not a man who salutes back, because I never earned the right to. So instead, I did the only thing I had. I stepped forward and I hugged that soldier and I whispered in his ear, "Welcome home, son. Your daddy never gave up on you, not for one single day." So that's the story. That's the day a 74-year-old stranger and a piece of worn down metal taught an old game show host what this life is actually about. I keep a photo now in my dressing room. Every studio I work in, it goes up on the mirror first thing. It's not a pose shot. It's the moment that boy came through the door on his new leg and his father rose up out of that chair and both of them were reaching across all those years toward each other. I look at it before every show. It reminds me that the lights and the laughs and the prizes, that's not the job. The job is people. The job is love. The job is the connection between us, the one the whole world tries to make us forget. And it reminds me of every family that isn't as lucky as this one. Every father who got the medal and didn't get his son back. Every mother standing at a window that's never going to fill with the face she's waiting for. Every kid growing up with a folded flag instead of a father. Those families are real. They're all around us. And they carry it quiet, the way that old man carried his medal, every single day. Because here's the thing I understood that afternoon, maybe for the first time in my whole life. Every one of those people sitting in my audience, laughing, clapping, hollering out answers, every one of them is carrying something. You can't see it. Doesn't show up under the studio lights. Somebody in that room lost a child. Somebody's holding a diagnosis they haven't told their family about yet. Somebody drove 3 hours to be there because it's the first time they've smiled in months. We walk past each other every day, in the grocery store, on the highway, in the pew, and we have no idea what the person next to us is carrying inside their own worn smooth metal. That old man taught me to look closer, to slow down, to notice the one who's gone quiet. Because sometimes the quietest person in the loudest room is holding the biggest story of all. So let me ask you something before I go. 3 things, really. If this story moved you, if you felt even a piece of what I felt standing on that stage, do me a favor. Right now, in the comments, type 3 words. Thank you, heroes. Not for me, not for any algorithm. Type it for the ones who are far from home tonight, standing a post in the dark, so you can sleep safe in your bed. They'll never read a survey answer, but a whole lot of them read these comments. Let them know we see them. And second, do you know a veteran? An old soldier who carries it quiet, like that man in the third row? Call him today. Don't wait. Pick up that phone and just say, "I'm thinking about you, and thank you." That phone call might be the whole reason he makes it through this week. You never know what a person is carrying inside their metal. And last, if this story reminded you what really matters, share it. Send it to somebody who needs to be reminded that miracles still happen, that the ones we grieve aren't always as far away as we fear, and that love, real love, a father's love, a soldier's love, does not quit, not on the battlefield, not in the hospital, not for years, not ever. Because I'll tell you what I know for sure now, in a way I never knew it before that day. Heroes come home. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes they come home broken, walking careful on a brand new leg. And sometimes they come home to a father who never once stopped believing, holding a medal with a secret folded up inside it, waiting. Thank you for letting me tell you about the best day I ever had on this stage. Go hug somebody you love. And to every soldier, every veteran, every family standing at a window waiting, thank you. From the very bottom of my heart, thank you. God bless you all. And God bless the heroes who come home.